When you're looking at the Middle East, it's a wide and varied region, but generally speaking, in the smaller communities, just by asking a few questions, you can get confirmation that someone lives there. It's harder to do in London, for example.
Yes, interesting.
By just asking someone, not the community's not maybe that tight in the neighborhood. No, your
but you have
neighbors
other
necessarily.
You have other
ways
of finding out with all
so
these
you have
public
to be
records.
creative in how you identify the information.
The Global Passport Investor is your go-to podcast.
Welcome to the latest episode of the Global Passport Investor. I'm your host, Eric Major, an investment migration veteran with over 30 years in the game. And I'm also the founder and chairman of the Latitude Group, a leading international investment migration firm where our clients expect the world and we deliver it. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube, please leave your questions in the comment section below. And if you're listening to the podcast, we invite you to email your queries to questions@globalpassportinvestor.com. So today we're going to be discussing the topic of due diligence in the citizenship by investment industry. And before we meet our very special guest, I would like to share with you a bit of a funny story, an anecdote around my experience with due diligence early in my career. As some of you who've listened to our previous podcasts would know, I had headed and operated for over 15 years, in fact, a Residency and Citizenship by Investment division at HSBC. And shortly after the financial crisis in early 07 into 08, the bank was implementing stronger due diligence measures to onboard new clients. And one of these measures included giving department heads, such as myself, access to a new global online database that the bank had subscribed to. And there are many such databases available in the marketplace today, but they were quite novel at the time and provided basically access to international sanctions lists, and they would look at government and regulatory blacklists and court records, and they got this thing called politically exposed persons, and they would identify that and the like. And my job, after myself getting training, was to provide training to my team on this new database. So here I was walking them through how we insert the name, and, you know, for fun, we put Osama bin Laden at the time. And obviously, he was still around at the time, and there was a lot of entries regarding Osama. And so one of a heckler of a colleague in the room said, "Hey, Eric, put your name on the list." So I did. And you have to put your name, and you have to put your date of birth, and actually quite a bit more information on some of them. But at the time, it was just those two. Press enter, and in front of my whole audience of about 15, 20 people, there was a hit. There was an Eric Major. And everyone looked at me thinking, "Ooh, what's our boss done before?" And so I clicked on it myself quite nervously. And this Eric Major had the same date of birth and year. So day, month, and year as I did. And then there was 2 articles, just a link, but so you couldn't know really what the story was until you click on the link. And I did nervously again, not knowing myself what I would find. And I suddenly saw an African-American who turns out has the same name as I, same date of birth, and who's the governor of Alabama, at least at that time. And he still is politically active. So in fact, I crossed through some exchanges with him on LinkedIn. So, yeah, I'm sure I've created some issues for him as well, maybe. But it was just an interesting story, which in the end I was happily relieved to see. It was, and this name was on the list because he's politically exposed. So what I think you would call in your industry due diligence, the due diligence industry as a false positive. And so while these databases are a very good tool at one level, they are but one layer of the onion, one side of the Rubik's Cube of a person's life and how we could get to really understand someone's background. And it's one of many tools in the due diligence toolbox. And to help us understand these other instruments and measures that firms like SRM are using to understand the background and the stories behind these applicants in the citizenship by investment industry, I'm very pleased to welcome today our special guest, Dilan Raphiann, from Associate Director of SRM. So Dilan, very nice to meet you. Welcome to the show.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Indeed, and you were just sharing some anecdotes around your connection to this part of Southwest London, where we are again recording from the podcast room in beautiful Barnes. So thank you for making your journey over this morning. Well, before we get into the details and have a discussion around this really intriguing world that you're in, this due diligence world, tell us a little bit about yourself and SRM as a firm.
Great. Thanks, Eric. Yeah. A little bit about myself. I always struggle with this one because of how far do you want to go back? But I am of Kurdish descent. My family moved to the UK when I was almost 10. I studied journalism as my undergraduate and then went on to do a master's in Middle Eastern studies and have done, various roles before joining SRM about 5.5 years ago now. When I started at SRM, I joined as an associate. So my role at the time was case managing the work that our analysts write. So the cases, the requests that we get from our clients are first and foremost researched and analyzed by the client, by the analysts. And then the case manager has a role in directing that research and scrutinizing the findings, etc., finalizing it before the end product is complete. And now my role is leading that team. So the team at SRM that we call the investment migration team focus solely on serving these CBI clients.
Excellent. And ultimately, the applicants are the ones applying for citizenship.
Correct.
But your client in the end, presumably, is the government or the citizenship units. Is that correct?
Exactly. So exactly. When I refer to clients, I mean the CBI programs and the applicants.
That you're reviewing and vetting.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. And so now my role is leading that team, and along with my colleague Raphiann, who together we run, a rapidly growing team, and one that is headquartered in London, but we have 9 global offices at SRM, and we collaborate with all the offices depending on the profile of the applicant that we get and the application that we receive. So we always send to the request goes to whoever is best placed
geographically and expertise.
Linguistically, regional expertise, and understanding of the context, which context is key.
Yeah, there's still very much a local aspect to proper DD, isn't there? You got to get closer to the actual source markets and understanding, because a lot could be in the public domain, but there's so much more one can understand locally what the underlying stories are to some of these people. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I think it's one of the greatest value adds that a DD provider can add to the service
storyline
that they provide. Exactly. It's that nuance, the grey between the lines. Because there's one thing to conduct research and do a bit of a Google scrape and do your regular checks. It's an entirely different thing to provide the nuance and the assessment and the additional layer that really helps to the client to make an informed decision.
Yes.
Because you're helping them to make a decision. You're not just presenting the information, you're also helping them to understand said information.
Context.
You have to give them the context. What does this mean in its context? The same information from one country or one region can mean an entirely different thing somewhere else.
True,
so our
actually.
team is, comprises of linguists, so those that speak the language, often, with a native tongue. And then those that have lived, worked in the region, they are familiar with their surroundings.
Yeah.
They know if something is commonplace or not.
Yes.
We see and understand the patterns, so we can say, we've identified this, however, we think this means this, and therefore it is or isn't a concern depending on the context of that information.
And for our listeners to understand, the ultimate end product, the deliverable of this work that you've summarized very nicely is something I believe I and a guy named Kim Marsh, who is also in this industry, coined in the early 2000s, called the BVR, a background verification report. This is what we felt, certainly at the bank at the time, but also what the citizenship units were interested in, which is a specifically formatted background verification report that would address some key headings around the individual and their family and their business. So these BVRs, I've seen quite a few of them in my career, typically 15 to 25 pages, depending on how complex the life is. This is ultimately where all of this is captured, right? So could you walk through for our listeners, like what are the efforts and the actual deliverables that you bring to these reports? Like, what is it you're looking at, and where are you looking for it?
Good question. Yeah, so we have a sort of a standard, we have a skeleton, which I understand and believe that, you know, the other DD providers that serve our clients do the same, which have a foundation that we base it on, and so that it's easy for compare and contrast reasons, and the client can expect the same kind of product or the same process to be fulfilled each time. However, obviously it's case by case, because when you look at someone, it can veer off depending on your findings.
That's right.
And what you deem to be important, as I said, based on the context. So I mean, we're looking
veer off as in no issues if it's only Eric Major and it's
exactly. Well,
a
if it's
false
Eric,
positive. But if it's Osama, then you could have quite a few other things to look at.
Yeah, so we go through categories, and our reports are presented in a way, the same way each time, but the categories can expand depending on how much information you find. And so you mentioned in your anecdote, obviously the PEP, for example, political exposure, corruption, security risk or concern. We look into family background. We look more into it if we have concerns, for example, as to how maybe someone acquired their wealth.
Yes.
And there'll be other reasons why we might look into it in a little bit more detail. We the source of their wealth and their background, their career trajectory. Does it make sense?
Yes.
How they've come to be where they are. We look at their profile. Obviously, we look at media
to see what's out there.
Any negative allegations, criminal, civil litigation, all of that, and a lot more. Each time, but depending on.
And these reports, like you say, it's not just unearthing them, but it's providing some direction. Because I always say it's really easy when it's clean and white as white profile of an individual with no issues or no issues in the public domain. So that's easy. Equally, it's very easy when there are serious issues, criminality and the like, where it's very easy to say, these are not clients that countries should onboard as citizens. It's always the gray zones, isn't it? And that's the toughest part of the journey.
It is.
And that's where really they are these layers of the onion. How do you, some of these reports I've seen get into this notion of risk weighting. Could you explain what that entails and gradations in terms of, listen, we've unearthed this, but is it significant? Is it a concern? In your views, how do you translate that to the end recipient in these reports?
Yeah, you're completely right. It's that's the toughest part of the job. So the very clear, red alarm bells on this side, and then those that pass with
have no issues in the public domain. Those are easy ones.
Those are the easy ones. Without giving specific examples, it's difficult to say, but the whole process that we have with our clients is a consultative one. So there'll be back and forth. They'll be like, until they're confident that they have the information that they need. As I mentioned, so we rely a lot on our experts in the team. So we have country specialists, sector experts, for example, if someone's made their money through crypto or something.
So there's somebody in your team who know a lot about that industry, who the players are.
Exactly. And we rely not just on the investment migration team that solely serves the clients, but those that serve other clients sectors as well and have experience in various sectors. So it's very collaborative. The request from when we get it to the end process is entirely collaborative. And many people get involved to make sure that the information that we provide at the end is of value. But the other, fundamentally, it's also a collaborative process that in which human intelligence is involved. So contacts on the ground, local to the area that we're looking into.
And they'll provide color. I mean, you always have some findings, but then the local on the boots on ground kind of person could put some context to that
Exactly,
finding, right?
yeah.
Because we know, for example, again for our viewers and listeners, in many parts of the world, if you have detractors, they take measures to discredit that person, to bring them down, to throw mud at them, with different articles and medias and the like. And once it's out there, it's out there. But what's the context? Is this commercial warfare, which you often I've seen in Russia and CIS markets, or is it substance? There's truly a problem or an issue with this person, and often you have to get that intel from the local market or the sector-specific person who has that knowledge, right?
Yeah, that's our responsibility, because presenting it, as you say, if you just said this is out there to the client, do with it what you will, it's not helpful.
Yeah, that's right.
So they rely on us, naturally, for us to say, okay, but are there any political leanings here? Could it be is it a smear campaign? Is it black PR? And
Yes.
that it can be very commonplace, especially if the individual profile is such that they might be in opposition, for example, or something
Yes.
like that.
Yes.
So we have, the fact that we have regional understanding, even media publications, obviously they have leanings. Every country, it's common for a newspaper or publication online to have a certain leaning and might be motivated in one way or another to articulate themselves to positively or negatively convey a certain message. And so it's up to us to decipher it, and be objective as far as we can. Obviously everyone has their own natural unconscious biases as well, so we're constantly training ourselves to maintain neutrality ourselves, and then to identify objectively how other people are conveying that in the media. But as you said, the human intelligence on the ground adds that color. Often they can confirm something that we're already leaning towards ourselves, or an assumption, a conclusion that we may already have arrived at, but they confirm it and
or
add
refute
the color.
it
Or conversely refute it. And then if we need to, we can say, we can direct them, but they're very well trained, and we've worked with many of them for as long as we've worked at SRM ourselves, to be able to go to more sources and spend a little bit longer. We will continue until we are confident enough in our analysis that we can go back to the client with something that's
solid
helpful.
and that you could lean on. But again, appreciating that some applicants have easier lives. Most of them have very complex lives, certainly in the CBI industry, I found. What is typically the deliverable, knowing how there's exceptions and you fight with country holidays and things like that to get the information, but what's your typical turnaround time for a BVR?
So the client will kind of set out their expectations, but it's between 15 to 20 days.
Yeah. Okay.
Sometimes, depending on the complexity and the profile of the individual, and also it may be difficult if they're very well known to get too close, especially that human intelligence that I mentioned. So the people on the ground have to be, obviously, we have to maintain discretion. They have to be careful not to get too close, that they alert and arouse suspicion. And not far away enough that it's actually useful. So it has to be balanced.
I'm going to touch on that, but I'm reminding here that I should invite our viewers who are watching this on YouTube to please leave us any questions in the comment section. And for those of you listening, please email your queries to questions@globalpassportinvestor.com.
The greatest investment you could ever make is an investment in your future. Rift Trust and Latitude Group is the leading provider of residency and citizenship solutions for high net worth individuals.
Our clients are like our extended family. We're a global firm with a local focus.
What makes us truly unique is our leadership team. 100 years of combined industry experience, and we're working every day with governments to improve and build new residency and citizenship programs.
Obtaining a second residence or citizenship is the best modern insurance policy for you and your family.
Our clients
Expect the world.
we deliver it.
Hello to freedom.
Well, this last point I want to flesh out a little bit, because it is that very delicate, not get too close, that raises the alarm bells, which means the applicant knows you're phishing, and that could create its own issues, but not being too far away. So could summarize a little bit or flesh out a little bit more of these issues that you guys face when checking someone's background?
Yeah, because obviously when the applicants apply for these programs, they agree and sign
There's
an
consent.
application. Consent for the due diligence by a third party to be carried out. So there's no secret that, we're doing that. And obviously, naturally, you would expect it with such an investment. However, it can compromise the authenticity of our findings if the applicant or their social circle is aware, and they might answer questions or give information that is not entirely correct if they know that it's you that's asking. For example,
interesting.
So that's something to be careful of, and also just there are we do a better job when we're discreet, and we have to maintain discretion. Obviously, it's part of the service. So it's a very fine balancing act.
Indeed.
It depends on the individual. So our sources on the ground know of the individual first, and will take the steps according to
the profile,
and
the situation,
and how
to navigate that.
For example, one of the things we have to verify is someone's address. Do they live where they say they do? You can do this in various ways. Sometimes by asking questions, and communities, depending on the community. For example, when you're looking at the Middle East, it's a wide and varied region, but generally speaking, in the smaller communities, just by asking a few questions, you can get confirmation that someone lives there. It's harder to do in London, for example.
Yes, interesting.
By just asking someone, the community's not maybe that tight in the neighborhood. You don't even know your neighbors necessarily.
You have other
ways
of
doing
finding
that.
out with all
so
these
you have to
public
be
records.
creative in how you identify the information, and that's again a collaborative effort by us as we get the request from the client, where we communicate with our contacts exactly how we want them to do it, and they all have their own ideas, so we come to an agreement, and then they keep us up to date, so they keep us in the loop, and we will sort of help direct the inquiries to ensure that we're maintaining discretion, the information that we get is authentic and as accurate as possible. But we have an obligation also to safeguard our contacts.
Yes.
As to not come into contact with, some...
Yeah. Yes, because that could be
danger,
problematic if you're unearthing some really difficult findings. That you don't want to expose those channels, I guess. Well, I want to provide some further context again for our listeners and viewers that when you mount and compile and submit an application, which is the work of Latitude, we fill out these forms with our clients and we submit them. I always tell the client, in the end, be mindful that the CIU is going to do a few things. First of all, they're going to try to confirm through the likes of your service, but even of their own means, including these databases, just the veracity of the information they provide. Like you say, they say they live here. Do they live here? They say they have a number of addresses. They check that out. They say they're married to such and such person and they have 3 kids. They check that out. Then there's the commercial side. Oh, they say they own 67% of ABC Inc. in Kazakhstan. Do they? Because if that business is of a sectorial concern, then there could be some exposed risk. And then finally, there's this very important source of funds and source of wealth aspect as well. Because in the end, these programs all have money involved, and that money comes from the applicant into the hands of government. And so the government obviously wants to understand, is the storyline there a valid one? I always say, whether you're Bill Gates or Dilan or Eric, you can normally summarize one's personal net worth and anywhere between 3 to 7 bullets. I bought this house, sold it, made this. I had this stock, I bought Microsoft in 1980. It's worth that. And you could, summarize 80% of someone's wealth into this very short 3 to 7 bullet narrative. Now, of course, one could do a deep dive after that. But what are the main issues you think that the CIUs face, and ultimately that you guys face when doing this DD? What would you recommend ultimately clients to provide? Because that's often the question. Oh, how much do I give? And this is a balancing act too. But what would your recommendation be?
As many documents as possible.
Yes.
However, having said that, it really depends on the jurisdiction that the applicant comes from too, because what is available, and sometimes documents. I mean, for example, asking for, I've applied for visas before or for any other process whereby DD is carried out on me, for example, and I've been asked for a bank or for a loan or something, and it asks you, please provide a employment letter. So SRM will write me a letter headed, on letter-headed paper, Dilan makes this much, she's been employed with us for this long. Yeah. Great. And, the bank can go back and check if it needs to with SRM and give them a call and call the signatory on my letter. It's just a letter, though. If they get that confirmation, it's great. But if you're getting a letter from, say, any other country, we can use the MENA region as another example. It's not clear who the signatory is. It could well have been written by anyone. Really, It's just a typed up letter. Sometimes it's not even on company-headed paper, and ultimately, it doesn't have the same weight exactly, unless you can verify with individuals.
Yes. So that's an interesting.
So I say
what has gravitas in some markets around getting this may be a little bit flimsy in another part of the world.
So
how much do you weigh on it?
Provide more documents, knowing full well that not all documents hold the same weight.
Yes.
So there's still a process, case by case again, tailored on what you find, and our role really is filling in the gap where there are gaps in information, trying to fill those and being very creative about how we find it. So there's the human, there's OSINT tools at our disposal, and obviously with technological advancement, they're constantly growing, and it's amazing how far DD has come. When we sent kits whose DD started in 1984 until now.
Yes, it's a totally different world.
Has changed significantly, I'm sure.
It has, starting back then, even with the line of questions. These application forms in the early days were quite light. Now, it's got multiple sections and multiple forms. There's even medical checks and reference checks and banking details, and of course everything about the individual and the spouse and the children. So it's a very comprehensive, it's a very intrusive process, we say, and we tell our clients, and most clients understand this in the modern age of dealing with banks and financial services and governments. You're going to have to provide a lot of information for them to do the work there. But it is a very difficult task. I always say, the citizenship unit heads or their teams have a very difficult task deciphering what you produce, what's available to them, and addressing the real hard realities of the gray zones. It's really the gray zones. Again, the easy ones are clear and easy, either if it's a crook or if it's somebody with no issues, then those are easy. But the gray zones are where you have to bring some nuance and some understanding. And this is why these reports that you provide well above what is in the public domain, right?
Yeah,
it's not just a Google search or some of these other companies that I was referring to that do this. And what are the next size or measures or size of a Rubik's Cube, I guess I was trying to say, that's being implemented? Again, to further enhance the due diligence under these programs, it's been announced recently, will be interviews. And I know SRM's been part of that dialogue in the setting up of that new measure. There's confusion around what exactly it will entail. I know it may be a slight difference from one Caribbean program to the other, because those are the 5 Caribbean nations that are implementing this. At the very least, let's address what we know it will be. It's just data validation and identification, ID&V, identification, verification of the person in front of you. Does it match with the passport? And then just a few questions. Is that all it's going to be, or is there more to it than this? What can you tell us about this interview process?
I suspect that over time it will develop into perhaps becoming more comprehensive than what you say. But yeah, from the outset, that's the obligation it's fulfilling. And does what the person is saying in the interview reflect what they have reported in their application form? Is it the same person? Can we prove that there's no one else in the room coaching them what to say, and it is in fact their own telling of their own narrative? And also perhaps an opportunity, and maybe this will develop with time, whereby the interviewer has an opportunity to probe a little bit further, because the application form has a set number of questions, doesn't change really, and you can expand on those as little or as much as you like in your response, really, in the application form. So maybe the interview is another opportunity to add a little bit of colour to it, and an opportunity also for the interviewee, the applicant, to explain, and provide a little bit more context.
I would hope that it evolves to way more than just, confirming the identity of the person in front of you, which I recognize very important, and maybe just validating a few basic questions. As you say, there's a strict list that they're all going to follow, but I hope it does allow for the CIU or for the unit, whoever's conducting the interview, to probe a little bit deeper on what findings may have been unearthed through these reports that you guys issued, and getting that color or that perspective from the applicant. I think that would be a necessary step, but I know it opens up a whole other set of can of worms of, potential appeals and all that. So I think they're just trying to tick only a few boxes, but I would hope that they would expand it again, all in the spirit of enhanced due diligence.
Yeah, and then also because as you said, all the programs have a slightly different sort of interpretation or preference as to how they want their DD reports, how they want their interviews. So with time, hopefully, if that can become standardized a little bit more, and that there's a template that everyone uses, or at least a more similar, then that could be a more beneficial service on all accounts, and then there's no one sort of program doing slightly less or slightly more. It will help also with the mounting scrutiny that's on the programs, to show that they are, this is how robust we are, and we're all doing the same thing. And it has been robust. As we're as a DD, from a DD perspective, we know we're confident that we're very comprehensive in our DD, and as I said, it's consultative, and there's a lot of back and forth. Often there's follow up after the DD as well, so something will be done, and they'll come back and they'll have questions, and we'll provide more clarity and insight.
Well, and I want to just finish off maybe on the technical side of it, around how you were saying earlier. Obviously, the human aspect of this work is still very important, but technology is also playing a big role. Give us examples of where that is. One that I'm pretty sure you would say is, they got these facial recognition tools nowadays. But what else is out there that technology is helping to enhance what the human research and on the ground knowledge brings to the equation?
Yeah. So the facial recognition is a great one to look into for interviews, for example, where it can, the person is appearing behind the screen and answering their questions, and if you can also say this matches, their passport, then, because otherwise you're just basing it on sort of visual examination by the human eye obviously isn't quite the same. So if you could have verification of that kind, and obviously AI when it comes to writing up, collating the information, the research that can be taken online, making the process more efficient.
Yes.
However, not, there is really no compromise you can make for the human intelligence.
Yes.
The analysis cannot be can't be done by sort of AI, all the stuff I mentioned about the nuance, the granularity, the regional understanding.
They can unearth probably more than any human can in terms of bringing it to the table.
But they can't do the analysis.
Yeah.
That has to be human. The value that we provide in that, I don't think can be
and
replaced.
One thing I know that I think SRM also provides, but I know a lot in the industry are also saying to governments is, yes, it's a one-time snapshot. We're looking in a very finite period of time on someone's story and background, but technology is helping to do ongoing monitoring of those applicants, such that if something down the road happens, presumably you could go back to the client, in this case the government, and say, "Oh, we've just discovered something." Is that
that's something that we provide as standard? So every request that comes through to SRM from the CBI programs has a 12-month sort of monitoring service, complementary as part of the service, which monitors exactly as you say, sort of the keywords associated with that applications, individuals, businesses, etc. And if anything happens after our process is complete, the client is alerted of that, and then obviously up to them to decide what to do with that information.
Yeah, of course, if the deed is done and citizenship's been granted, then they have to look at things like, was this concealed? Could they have evidence that the client concealed it at the time of application, and could that be grounds to revoke citizenship? I unfortunately had experience where clients came through at the firm level as clear, at the citizenship unit level, after all the steps that we've touched on has been done, have also been cleared, and then in the example I have in mind, about 18 months later, it came to be known that this person had indeed done some really bad stuff
after they were
granted.
Yeah, because
then there's a retrospective. Everyone's looking, oh, what did we know at the time? And it wasn't there.
No,
but that's life, isn't it?
No, and DD providers, like anyone else, we can't predict the future, and we can't make assumptions based on someone's past either. But we can assess, their trajectory up until this point. And so the decision obviously ultimately lies. But if something happens in the future, then that's, as with any DD service, unfortunately, we don't have the crystal ball.
In our industry, we says in the same way that you can't guess who a newly born citizen, how they will develop to be, and whether they'll be fine or create some challenges for the nation as well. So it's just the reality of the business. Dilan, I want to have you finish our show with some form of anecdote like I shared earlier when we started. And with all these cases that you've seen over the years of being in this industry, I'm sure there's some funny stories in there. Is there an anecdote or a story, without revealing any names, or anything that you'd like to share with our audience as being a funny or intriguing anecdote? What comes to mind?
Yeah, I don't know if they're funny.
They don't have to be. They can be serious.
They can be serious. There have been instances of concealing or altering identity. So where altered documents are provided in order to tell a story that is inaccurate. For example, even children that don't belong to their so-called parents, whereby someone
people go to great lengths to slip somebody in,
or to take someone out. If a child or parent is going to be viewed negatively for whatever reason, we'll try to suggest that they won't put them as a list on the dependent list in the application. Or the alternative has also happened. The converse of that has been, I remember when I was asked by a client to just cross-check a passport with a birth certificate of a child that a supposed parent had sent along to say, "This is my daughter," and the birth certificate was in Arabic. It had been translated into English, and the English version said something different to the Arabic original.
So they try to slip that one in.
Yeah, and so often, with a little bit of you give the translator a little bit an incentive, for example, to just change some of the findings in it. This individual wanted to claim that the daughter was hers, and obviously, aside from identity fraud, that poses a human trafficking risk as well.
Yes,
There are so many other things implications global that our clients are more and more acutely aware of, and will develop with time, that we have to similarly be really conscious of. And so the risks are great. The impact of our work is, can have global ramifications. It's a great sort of weight on our shoulders, and one I think is not lost on us, and we take very seriously.
No, I'm glad you say, Dilan. I really think the work that you guys do at SRM and others in the industry, in the DD field that support the industry, have a very important role. And the CIUs that try to interpret that information on a daily basis is of immense significance and important, because no one of their right mind want to facilitate anything wrong, or undue people who could pose reputational risk to be slipped in, or people who don't, in this example, belong to the family they describe as their own. So there's and you could see to what extent people will try, and that's why the layers of the onion have to be very far and deep to be able to really get to the bottom of the storyline. So Dilan, I really appreciate you coming in today. You've been a great guest, and
Thank you.
I know that you'll continue to support this very important industry. So thank you for coming.
Pleasure.
And we'll close off by reminding our viewers and listeners to please join me next time as we continue our world tour of all things citizenship and residency by investment. Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Very much.
Good. Good to see you. All right.